morning, everybody. This is likely going to be a two-parted video introduction on Module 4. So as you all heard in class this morning, you have the opportunity to retake the first 30 multiple choice questions, or the first 30 questions, which were the multiple choice questions, to earn a small amount of points back. Okay, so you can earn back, I think, 7 points, which will just be bonus. There's two reasons why I'm doing this. One reason is simply because this exam is the toughest of all the exams. So it's an opportunity for you all to revisit the material and get even more information under your belt, so to speak, and that will help you with the lab practical that you're taking this week. Second thing, you'll see some of this material on the final exam, so not understanding it now and going into a lab practical and a final exam to me is not the way that I would like to have you prepared for a final exam, okay? Because I'm giving you back time during class today to do the retake, I'm going to do this video recording so that you can watch it at your convenience. So I just have to get this to advance. All right, so Module 3 is all about, as you saw here, describe the structure and function of the animal body. So really we're thinking about anatomy and physiology. You've probably heard this before. Anatomy is the study of structures. Physiology is the study of the function. Usually when we're thinking about physiology, it's complex processes, often on a cell level, involving, for example, electrical currents to make your heart beat and so on. The actual structure of the heart with the chambers and the heart valves and the major vessels, that would be the anatomy. But the actual cellular activity that causes that heart to contract really is physiology. So you might remember the levels of organization in a multicellular organism. We know that plants, fungi, animals are all multicellular. So our body is built on single cells working together to form tissues. Tissues are really just a conglomeration, if you will, of cells that have a similar function and often structure. So these tissues are made of different cell types and they're doing a particular function. We're going to go over those tissues in just a minute. Those tissues, and there are 4 in the animal body, those tissues are arranged in such a way to form your variety of organs. So organs like your heart, your lungs, your intestines, your kidneys, your brain, your nerves, it goes on, your skin. So there's many different tissue types, the 4 types that come together to form your different organs. And again, thinking about structure and function, if you take a look at tissues in your heart, their arrangement and their appearance and their particular mode of operating would be different than that of the kidney, which is a different organ, but made up of similar 4 tissues. Organs then cooperate with other organs to form organ systems. So you have a respiratory system, excretory system, endocrine system, nervous system, and it goes on and on and on, all the different systems of the body, and the skin and tegumentary system. So one question that comes to mind is, where do all these cells come from? So if we go back to thinking about what we call gastrulization, then we can identify where those tissues come from. Okay, so you might remember that the blastula, you may not remember this, but basically that is a early stage of development, maybe after 4 or 5 divisions of the zygote. And the first, what we call embryonic stem cells form. These stem cells then are going to give rise to everything else. And it starts with those stem cells giving rise to the 3 different layers of the gastrula. So you know this from Module 3 and from the exam. The endoderm, this innermost layer, and certainly we can see it, you can see my pointer here, this yellow lining, which really develops from what we call this invagination, or where the ball was, not the ball, the sphere had all the cells on the outside, and then some of those cells start punching upward inside of that ball. It was a hollow ball. Now it has this inside tissue layer, which will become the endoderm. You might remember that the endoderm, its main, the main way you're going to remember it is that the endoderm gives rise to the digestive tract, and the linings of the digestive tract. So it's everything from the mouth to the anus. Okay, it also is going to give rise to the respiratory and the urinary tract. Okay, so the endoderm is going to give rise to those tissues. Next, you might remember the ectoderm. The outside layer gives rise to the skin, so you already know that, nervous system, and then also your tooth enamel. So that's fascinating. And then lastly, we see this intermediate area, which is shown here in this figure with the pink cells. This is the mesoderm. Meso means middle. So meso, middle, makes muscles and most of your internal organs. So think heart, lungs, kidneys. Okay, it's also going to make your red blood cells and the lining of your cavity. Okay, and you have lots of cavities, but that's going to arise from the mesoderm. So if we take a look at this figure, remember, okay, so you were conceived at some point in time in the past, and that first cell, the zygote, begins to divide and divide and divide. And as it's dividing, it's making basically a solid ball of cells. And then we start going into the blastula, or what they call the blastocyst. Basically, we see that there is really a turning of the cells inside out, and then we see gastrulization. And wherever a cell was during this blastocyst, or in the gastrula, it's going to determine what that cell does for its lifetime. So whether it's endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm, and then we can have even more specialized stem cells. Okay, pluripotent, unipotent, you don't need to understand that, but basically it means, you know, when you're back here, totipotent, you can be anything. When you're pluripotent, you're already going to be destined to be either mesoderm, ectoderm, or endoderm. And then once you're like if you're a nerve cell, you're stuck. You're unipotent. You cannot become anything else. But the really great thing about stem cells, and you still have them in your body, for example, in your bone marrow, is that they can divide and become other, in this particular case, blood. Okay, if you're thinking about bone marrow. So here we go. Common sources of adult stem cells. I've just talked about the bone marrow. Fat is also a source of stem cells, and blood. Now, here's an interesting point that cancer is its own stem cells. So cancer, as you already know a little bit about, is because of a faulty gene where normally we would be checking and for abnormal cells and stopping mitosis if necessary. So those tumor suppression genes. So cancer cells can really regulate themselves and reproduce themselves. When cancer is metastatic, it can break off, let's say, from your kidney or your bladder and move elsewhere, okay? And so stem cells really can, cancer really can code for itself, if you will. So you can see some other places here, cornea, of course, the umbilical cord when you were still, you know, right there, right after birth. Okay, so let's take a look at tissues. I already mentioned that groups are similar cells that form a common function, whether that's muscle contraction or protection of underlying tissues. And so what we know is that those tissues come together to form organs. The four main tissue types that we're going to talk about, and you are going to be diving into this in lab. So again, this will work together, the material and lecture and lab. So you have your epithelial tissue. This is the tissue that lines or covers the outside of the body, and it lines the inside of your cavities. So you've got epithelial tissue in your mouth, all down through your trachea, and also all the way down your esophagus, all the way through any tracts or hollow cavities. Okay, epithelial tissue is very good at protecting underlying tissue, and it's often associated with secretions. So you've got a couple of different kinds of glands in your skin that's going to secrete materials, whether that be sebaceous glands that make sweat or sebum glands that make oils. Your epithelial tissue along your digestive tract can create some enzymes and dump those into the digestive tract. Second type of tissue type, connective tissue. Gosh, this is a big one. It includes everything from bone to blood, fat, the various kinds of cartilage in your body, things like collagen and elastin, tendons, and ligaments. So it's a very big group of tissues. Typically, when I think about connective tissue, I think about it connecting other tissues together, okay? So fat tissue really is a filler tissue, protecting your vital organs from trauma. Your blood is ultimately connecting, think about it from, the oxygen from your lungs moving to the heart and heart to the body. So connective tissue really is connecting other tissues together. The last two are relatively easy. We have the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue functions in contraction. And then lastly, nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is responsible for very quickly sending electrical and chemical signals to transfer information around the body very quickly. All right, if we take a look at epithelial tissue, here's an example. What you're going to see is that this includes skin and mucous membranes. And in lecture and in lab, you're going to learn that there's different ways to classify epithelial tissue. Two ways to classify it: number of layers of cells. So a single layer, we see over here an A, single layer is simple, okay? For that epithelial tissue that's made up of many, many layers, we call it stratified. So it's either simple or stratified. The second characteristic that we use for classifying it is the shape of the cells. Cells can be squashed or squamous and look like kind of like fried eggs. Down here we see, and I'm seeing that you don't see that on the slide, but this one is called cuboidal. So these cube-shaped cells all in a ring. Okay, so there's about 8 there. And here we see columnar epithelial tissue. Okay, this layer is simple, this layer is simple, this layer is simple. We just see the different shapes. And this last one happens to be layered, so stratified, and flattened or squamous. Okay, again, epithelial tissue covers the body's surfaces and also lines cavities of our organs and tracts. Okay, connective tissue. So basically we define connective tissue as being sparse cells scattered throughout a matrix. So when I think about blood, most of the blood is going to be plasma, and then we're going to see there's going to be certain fragments that are red blood cells and even less of white blood cells and even less platelets. So you have red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets basically being carried through a matrix we call the plasma. So we can see that the matrix can be a web of fibers embedded in liquid, jelly, or a solid. So a couple examples here. On the left side, you see loose connective tissue. It's under the skin and it's really anchoring this outside layer to those underlying tissues so that your skin doesn't fall off. Okay. Here you see loosely arranged cells kind of in a web-like material. Now here in bone, we see these little darkened kind of black-brown structures are part of single cells that make up the bone, and you're going to see that there's little tiny fibers or reinforcing material that's going to connect those cells together in the bone. Okay. So again, all the different examples, and there's even more not on the slide. So bone, blood, loose connective tissue, adipose, which is fat. We have tendons, ligaments. All right, next we have muscle tissue. So as you already know, muscle tissue functions in movement, and we have 3 basic kinds of muscle tissue depending on how it works. The big way that we classify muscle tissue is where is it located, and whether the muscle is under voluntary or involuntary movement. Lastly, we can just take a look at the overall look. Skeletal muscle has these very straight fibers, and then you see very nice perpendicular lines we call striations. Skeletal muscle always looks like this. Cardiac muscle, located within the heart, skeletal muscle associated with the skeleton, you can see is branched. Okay, and lastly, smooth muscle does not have striations and isn't branched.